Welcome. Welcome, community, to a new edition of Tales of the Night. This time we bring you a story that explores the dark corners of a house loaded with secrets, with memories lost in time. Imagine that you have lost everything, and the only thing left to you is an old home that seems to be waiting for you, full of mysteries, of presences that have not gone away. Join us while we discover what happens when the past insists on being present, and the young woman must face not only her loneliness but also the ghosts that inhabit her grandmother's home. Get ready to hear what occurs when the doors of the beyond open in the stillness of a house that holds much more than it seems. You are listening to Tales of the Night. Hi, community. My name is Andrea, and today I want to share with you an experience that has deeply marked my life. Perhaps it will be hard for you to believe me, because at first I myself refused to accept that everything was true. The things that happened to me seemed taken from a twisted nightmare. But I promise you, truly I promise, that everything I am about to tell is true. I have been listening to the podcast for years, and from the first story I heard, I always wanted to send my story. However, at the same time, I was terrified by the idea of reliving all those moments, both the sad ones and the manifestations. Manifestations that to this day continue to terrify me. Everything began when I was 6 years old. Well, at least it began for me at that moment, because as you will realize later, what I am about to tell you is something much older than me. I apologize if I extend myself too much, but I believe it is necessary for you to understand everything I went through. My family was very small. It was just my mom, my grandmother, and me. My father died in a car accident when I was just 6 years old, so we were always just the three of us. My mother and I always had a very close relationship, although for a large part of my childhood we were not together much. She worked all day to ensure I would not lack anything. Since she did not want to leave me alone, she asked my grandmother to receive me at her house for a while. This way we would keep each other company, since my grandmother had been widowed years ago, and my father had been her only son. At that time, my grandmother was very lonely. At first she refused, but after much insistence from my mother and seeing how difficult the situation was, she finally accepted. My grandmother's house was very large and very old, mostly built of wood. It was a house that had passed from generation to generation in this family. I remember very well that it was always illuminated. All the curtains remained open all day, and as soon as it got dark, my grandmother would turn on all the lights and leave them on until sunrise. She always had incense burning in every corner of the house. The smell was so strong that at first it made me dizzy, but I eventually got used to it as well. Something that had never caught my attention until I grew up was that in my grandmother's house there were no mirrors. None. My grandmother was extremely Catholic. She prayed day and night and always had candles lit in her room. When it was 8 p.m., she would tell me it was time to sleep. We would enter her bedroom and she would lock the door. We would not leave the room until the next morning. If I needed to go to the bathroom during the night, she would put a bucket in the room so I would not have to go out. And always after putting me to bed, she would sit in her rocking chair, take out her red rosary, and begin to pray. I would listen to her until sleep overcame me. Sometimes I would wake up to noises during the night. My grandmother would tell me they were wood creaks from how old the house was, and that I should not be afraid. But one night, I woke up and went to use the bucket. I did not want to wake my grandmother, who had fallen asleep in her rocking chair. While I was at the bucket, I heard a strange noise in the hallway. I approached the door and put my ear to it, thinking maybe my mom had come to see me after work. But when I paid attention, I could hear a very slow breathing, as if someone was having great difficulty breathing. I woke up my grandmother. I told her my mom had arrived, that she was in the hallway, and that I heard her strange, very tired. My grandmother got up with a start and put me back in bed. Then she turned on the intercom, which seemed to have gone out. She took her rosary from under the pillow and with a trembling voice began to pray. I remember it was the first time I felt a deep fear, and although I did not fully understand what was happening, something inside me told me it was not good at all. Very early in the morning, my mom arrived and helped my grandmother pack several things. From then on, we lived together, the three of us, in our house. From the day I returned home, I felt very nervous. I felt very cold most of the time, and at night the fear was such that I no longer got up to go to the bathroom. I am even ashamed to say it, but I ended up wetting the bed several times. From that first day we arrived, my grandmother would ask my mom to throw away the bathroom mirror. But my mother did not accept because it was the mirror where she fixed herself. So eventually my grandmother stopped insisting. But always when my mom went to work, my grandmother, trembling, would enter the bathroom and cover it with a sheet. At night she continued with her ritual, taking out her red rosary, lighting a candle, and praying. There was not a single day when she did not do this. My grandmother died of a heart attack when I was 13 years old. Her death hurt me very much. Since then, I became more solitary and fell into a deep depression. I remember in the last months before her death, I already saw her very tired, with sunken eyes and very thin. When I saw her in her coffin, it gave me much peace. Her cheeks had filled again, and thanks to makeup, she seemed to be only sleeping. A few days after her death, my mom changed jobs to one that would allow her to have more time with me. Economically, we were tighter, but at least we had each other. Since my grandmother's passing, the house felt lighter, the atmosphere was different, and I no longer feared the darkness. As a child, I believed this was because my grandmother was my guardian angel, and after death she could protect me from everything. Sometime later, my mom got a better paying job and was able to buy a small Infonavit house in a subdivision that was not yet completely built, but which for us was a dream. It was then that I met Dulce, my best friend to date. Dulce and her parents bought the house across the street. Since we were the same age and both only children, we quickly became very good friends. Her family became a pillar for us. My mom and Dulce's mom were practically the same age. They both had us very young and became very close as well. When I turned 24, my mom got sick. At first, the doctor said it was gastritis, but she worsened very quickly and too much. Dulce's mom took my mom to a specialist, and that's when they told us she had advanced stomach cancer that had already spread to her lungs, that there was nothing that could be done. They told us they could submit her to surgery to try to remove as much as possible, but that would only give her a few more months of life. I could not believe what they were telling me. My mom was the only thing I had left, and they were telling me that my time with her was counted, that it was about to end. Dulce's mom offered to pay for the surgery. Her family was well off, and since my mom had become like a sister to her, spending the money did not weigh on her. But unfortunately, my mom did not survive the operation. She died. My mother's death was completely devastating. I plunged again into total depression, and the idea of being alone, of being now completely alone, terrified me. I came to think several times of ending my life. Fortunately, I had Dulce, her mom, who did not leave me alone for a moment. Dulce's mom took care of me as if I were her own daughter. She would bring me food because she knew I often did not eat well, and I would spend the afternoons at her house after work, always seeking comfort in her company. But seeing Dulce so close to her mom only made me feel more empty and sad. I felt I needed a change. The house I shared with my mother was full of memories, and every corner reminded me of her essence. So I decided to move to my grandmother's old house in the village. But that was the worst decision I could have made. The house was very large and lonely. As I tell you, it was already very deteriorated, but I thought it could be the perfect place to start over. I hoped to find a little peace, away from the memories that suffocated me. Dulce warned me about the loneliness I might feel, but I trusted that the change would make me feel better. From the first time I crossed the threshold, I felt a cold that chilled me to the bone. But I thought it was normal since the house had been uninhabited for years. I spent the first days forcing myself to get up, to keep myself busy cleaning, painting the worn walls, full of mold. I wanted my grandmother's house to have life again. But when I started to feel a little better, things began to change almost imperceptibly. It all started with slight noises that I attributed to the house's age. Creaks in the wood, whispers of wind seeping through the cracks. But there was something more, something I could not explain, and that made me uneasy. The first thing that began to worry me were shadows. Shadows I would see out of the corner of my eye, crawling, standing out even in the darkness. It was as if someone was crawling on the floor. But when I turned to look directly, there was nothing. So I began to turn on all the lights in the house as soon as it got dark, and the darkness terrified me. One night, while trying to fall asleep, I heard a noise coming from the hallway. It sounded like something heavy was being dragged. I could recognize that sound. It was the same one I had heard the last time I was there, with my grandmother in that house. I convinced myself that it was all my imagination, a product of my exhausted, nervous mind from living alone in that enormous house. But then the smells began. A dense, nauseating sulfur stench would invade the house every time those noises were present, and no matter how much I ventilated the rooms and cleaned with bleach, the smell persisted. At first I thought it could be rats, that probably several had died between the walls, so I began to buy scented candles and leave them in the rooms. What is very marked in my memory is the first experience that truly terrified me in that house. One morning, while combing my hair in front of the bathroom mirror, I noticed something strange about it. At first, I thought it was my imagination, but looking closer, I realized something was not right. My reflection was looking back at me with a smile I was not making. It was as if my face was forced to smile in a strange way. And my eyes? My eyes seemed empty, sunken as if they were not mine. At that moment, panic invaded me. I felt a shiver run from my feet to my head, and I could feel my heart beating so fast that I thought it would jump out of my chest. I wanted to scream, but I could not. It was as if fear had left me mute. After looking away for a second, I looked at the mirror again. Everything seemed normal. I told myself it must be my mind playing a bad trick on me, probably from exhaustion or whatever, but deep down, I felt there was something more. Without thinking twice, I ran out of the bathroom. I went to work with my hair half done. I was dead of fear in all the way I could only think about that damn smile in the mirror. And that night, when I returned home, the fear also returned. The bathroom door that I remembered having slammed shut was open. I felt an irrational fear having to pass through there to reach my bedroom. That night I slept with the lights on, with the lock on the door, and although I was ashamed to admit it, I put a bucket in case I needed to pee at night. As soon as dawn broke, I decided to cover the few mirrors I had brought with sheets and towels to avoid looking at them, to avoid having it happen again. Over time, the smell of sulfur began to become present throughout the house. It was a nauseating aroma that intensified during the nights. Also, the noises continued and became more frequent. The night filled with strange sounds, as if someone was moving furniture or crawling on the floor, as if I was not the only inhabitant in that house. One afternoon, Dulce came to visit me. I was giving her a tour of the house, but I had not yet told her anything about what had been happening to me. I did not want her to think I was crazy or that it was all part of my depression. When I was showing her my room, which was previously my grandmother's room, she said something that froze my blood. "I'm so glad you adopted a dog. At least you're not alone in this big house," she said in a relieved tone. "What dog?" I asked, puzzled. She just made a doubtful face and told me, "Don't tell me it's a cat because I've never seen one so big." Seeing my confused face, she just managed to say, "Well, when we were coming in, I clearly saw something out of the corner of my eye following in the hallway, but it went into the bathroom." She had not yet finished speaking when we heard a crash in the hallway. We ran to see, and we both saw the chandelier on the floor. On the ceiling, there were several dirty little handprints, barely visible, as if an 8-year-old child had been crawling there on the ceiling. But those prints, as they advanced, began to take the shape of a dog's paws. Dulcie ran out like a bat out of hell, and I was behind her. We got into her car and drove until we reached a fast food restaurant on the outskirts of the village. We parked in the plaza, and while eating inside the car, Dulce asked me for an explanation of what we had just witnessed, as if I had a clear answer, as if I owed her one. I decided to tell her everything that had been happening to me, risking that she would think I was crazy, but to my surprise, she believed me. Afterward, we went to her house. I took the opportunity to pass by my mother's house. When I entered, I felt the heavy fiber again, the rotten smell that now also invaded that place. I was filled with anger, thinking that these things that tormented me had also invaded my mother's house. That night I had to sleep at Dulce's house. We set up a kind of camp in the living room with several blankets, as we used to do when we were girls. I have a light sleep, so I felt when Dulce got up to go to the bathroom in the early morning. I was falling asleep again when Dulce returned, crying and waking me up. "The mirror, the mirror," she repeated over and over again. I tried to calm her down, and when she could speak, she explained that while washing her hands, she looked in the mirror. Her reflection was giving her a slight smile, barely perceptible but strange, very terrifying. She said that was not her face, that something was wrong. I told her maybe she had dreamed it while half asleep, especially after I had told her about my entire experience. That calmed her down a bit, but she insisted we go to the bathroom together. We took down the mirror, stored it in her mother's room, which was empty because she had come to visit one of her sisters. That night, neither of us could sleep. In the morning, Dulce took me back to my grandmother's house, but this time she did not want to enter. From then on, the noises in the house intensified each night. Sleeping became a martyrdom, and I decided to move to the downstairs room, which was right under my grandmother's old room. That afternoon, while I was finishing moving my things to the new room, I received a call from Dulce. Her voice sounded trembling. She was full of fear. "I swear you won't believe me. It's not a suggestion. The same thing happened to my mom," she said. "What happened?" I asked. "Earlier this morning, I went into my mom's room and saw that she had a towel covering her vanity mirror. I got nervous and asked her why she had covered it, and she told me that same morning, while she was cleaning her room, when she looked in the mirror, she saw her face in a strange way. She approached because she thought that from far away and without glasses, she was imagining things. But the closer she got, the more she saw how her face was smiling in a normal way, with a forced smile, with eyes full of suffering. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Dulce had not mentioned anything of this to her mother, so there was no way she could be suggesting it either. "And that's not all," Dulce added. "My house has been smelling really bad, like there's a dead animal inside. It's the same place as your mom's house." I broke down crying. I couldn't believe what was happening. I wanted to convince myself that none of this was real, but what Dulce had told me confirmed that everything was true. I felt guilty that these things were also tormenting her mom, who had done nothing but be good to me. After hanging up with her, I searched the internet, on social media, in groups of witches, people who could help me with a cleansing or something similar. This is how I found the contact of an older woman who lived about 40 minutes from my grandmother's house. Out of respect, I won't mention her name or address. I understand she no longer dedicates herself to this. That same afternoon after work, I went to see her. There was no one else before me, so I quickly went in. The room where she received me was large and dark, with an enormous altar of a saint I did not recognize. It looked strange. The atmosphere was charged with a mixture of incense, wax herbs. There were lit candles everywhere and branches scattered on the floor. Before I could say anything, the woman told me that she felt a very strong and negative energy with me, that several entities were tormenting me. Although she could help me reduce the manifestations, she could not completely get rid of them and warned that trying to do so could be counterproductive, increasing the manifestations instead of diminishing them. I told her everything that had been happening since I arrived at the house and also what I had felt, heard, when I lived with my grandmother in childhood. I mentioned Dulce's situation as well. The woman explained that although she could not say how these things had attached themselves to my family, she was sure they had been with us for years, perhaps generations. She said it was likely that these entities had attached themselves through someone, even through my grandmother. She mentioned that we would need several cleansing sessions, both in my house, in Dulce's house, and in my mother's old house, but warned that these entities could continue tormenting us anyway. The first cleansing session was very intense. The woman drew salt lines on the floor and lit black candles in each room. She recited her strange prayers and burned branches throughout the house, filling the air with a dense and penetrating aroma. After several weeks of sessions, the noises ceased for a while, but the smell of sulfur remained. The last paranormal thing that happened to me in the house occurred on my last night there. I was trying to fall asleep when upstairs, in the hallway, I could hear that thing crawling. This time I could hear the sound of its hands supporting itself on the floor, slowly and heavily, one after another, as if it was hard for it to advance. I was paralyzed with fear. I was terrified by the idea that it could come down the stairs, reach the room where I was. I tried to pray in my mind. I tried to remember the prayers my grandmother used to say in her room at night, but my mind was blank. I couldn't remember anything. That thing kept moving in the hallway. I could hear its heavy breathing getting closer to the stairs. Suddenly, the noise stopped abruptly, and when I began to calm down, that horrible breathing was heard just under my bed. I felt a terrible oppression that began at my feet and ended at my head. I think I passed out. When I woke up, it was still dark. I was so afraid that even stretching my hand to the nightstand beside my bed to grab my cell phone terrified me. Then the silence of the room was interrupted by murmurs accompanied by the creaking of wood upstairs. The same sound it made when my grandmother rocked in her rocking chair while praying. At first, it was hard for me to realize, but then I could concentrate on the murmurs. I recognized the voice coming from upstairs. It was my grandmother's voice. I could hear her praying far away in her room, sitting in her rocking chair. Tears began to run down my eyes. Suddenly, I felt a peace that I had not experienced in a long time. I remembered her prayers. I began to pray to the rhythm of the murmurs until I fell asleep. The next morning, I gathered my things and left. I felt that night could have been the last, but that my grandmother was there to protect me. I felt she had returned to tell me that I must leave that house. I went up to her room one last time. Armed with the courage that daylight gave me, I thanked her for protecting me. I told her I would move, that she could continue resting in peace. I promised her that her house would still be there and that I would make sure no one else inhabited it. When I turned towards her rocking chair, there it was, her rosary, That red rosary with which she always prayed and which I swear I saw in her hands when we buried her in the coffin. I admit it frightened me very much to see it there, but I couldn't leave it. I still have that rosary with me to this day. It is the reminder that my grandmother is my guardian angel and that she will always be watching over me. Dulce came to help me with the move, and as we were leaving the house, she asked me if the cleansing lady was there. I told her no, that I hadn't spoken to her in a while. Because I could swear I saw her. Or at least I saw a woman in the upstairs window. She even had a yellow apron with red flowers. As soon as she finished the sentence, I began to cry. It was her. It was my grandmother. She always wore a yellow apron, a faded and worn out one. Very old, but that she loved. No matter how many new ones we gave her, she kept using the old one. There was no way Dulce could be lying to me because she never knew her. Not even in photos. 6 years have passed since I moved from my grandmother's house. I have not heard the crawling being or seen the crawling shadow. Although mirrors still terrify me, I have not seen anything out of the ordinary in my reflection. My friend Dulce has not experienced anything paranormal again. The only thing that accompanies me to this day is that horrible stench in my house, a reminder that those beings are still with me. But I am sure that my grandmother continues to watch over me, that she does not let them manifest beyond that. Of course, I still keep her red rosary, and every night before sleeping I light a candle. I pray the same prayers my grandmother used to pray. My curtains are always open, and during the night, all the lights in my house remain on. I avoid drinking water before sleeping so I don't have to go to the bathroom, and if I feel the need, I have a bucket in my room. I do everything as a precaution because I know these things will never leave me in peace. Thank you, community, for listening.